Imagine walking through a desolate, sun-baked landscape of limestone cliffs. You throw a stone into a dark, narrow cave opening and hear the sudden, unexpected sound of shattering pottery. That simple accidental discovery by a shepherd boy in the winter of 1946 or early 1947 set off a chain of events that would change our understanding of history, religion, and the transmission of the Bible forever. It led to the discovery of roughly 900 ancient manuscripts hidden for 2 millennia in 11 caves near the ruins of Qumran, right on the northwest shore of the Dead Sea. This is the story of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Hello everyone, this is Gilgamesh. We're going to explore the dramatic cloak and dagger struggles to secure the scrolls, the actual scribal practices used to write them, and the profound impact they had on biblical translation. And finally, we're going to look at and debunk some of the sensationalist myths, conspiracies, and high-tech modern forgeries that have surrounded them. There are a lot of names from a variety of cultures in this script, and I'm going to do my best, but I apologize in advance. To understand the story of the scrolls, we have to start with the people who actually found them. In the winter of 1946, Muhammad el-Dib and his cousin Muhammad Juma, young Bedouin shepherds from the semi-nomadic Ta'amira tribe, were searching the rugged cliffs near the Dead Sea for a lost goat. Some later accounts suggest they might have also been seeking hidden treasure, but what they found was even better. El-Dib's thrown stone shattered a clay jar inside what we now call Cave 1. Upon entering, he found several large cylindrical clay jars containing ancient leather scrolls wrapped in protective linen. The shepherds took them back to their camp, initially hanging them on a tent pole while trying to figure out what they were worth. During this time, the manuscript that is now known as the Community Rule was unfortunately ripped in two. Not knowing their significance, some portions of the scrolls were reportedly used to start campfires. Seeking a buyer, the shepherds first approached an antiquities dealer by the name of Ibrahim Ija in Bethlehem. He turned them away, suspecting that the scrolls might have been stolen from a local synagogue. Undeterred, in the spring of 1947, the shepherds brought them to Khalil Iskander Shaheen, known locally as Kondo, a Bethlehem shoemaker and antiquities dealer, as well as another dealer named Fedi Salahi. Kondo bought 4 of the scrolls and quickly sold them for about $97 to Mar Athenius Yeshui Samuel, the metropolitan of the Syrian Orthodox monastery of St. Mark in Jerusalem. Meanwhile, Salahi sold the other 3 scrolls to Professor Eleazar Lipa Sukanik, a pioneering archaeologist at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. And that is how the first 7 scrolls were divided, setting the stage for an academic and political drama. The academic recognition of these scrolls occurred alongside the outbreak of the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. This is not a political channel. I'm going to do my best to be even-handed here. On November 29th, 1947, the exact day that the United Nations voted to approve the partition plan for Palestine, Professor Sukanik examined the 3 scrolls he had acquired from Salahi. He immediately recognized them as genuine Hebrew manuscripts from the Second Temple period. Working under the harsh conditions of the Siege of Jerusalem, Sukanik deciphered the texts of Isaiah B, the War Scroll, and the Thanksgiving hymns, while the rumble of artillery fire was in the background, noting in his diary that the ancient conflict between light and darkness seemed to mirror the geopolitical crisis that was unfolding around him. As the war intensified, Mar Samuel feared for the safety of the 4 scrolls. He smuggled them out of Jerusalem to a Syrian church in New Jersey and toured the United States trying to find a buyer. But because both Jordan and Israel claimed legal ownership of the manuscripts, respectable universities and museums refused to touch them. In desperation, the Metropolitan resorted to placing a classified advertisement in the Wall Street Journal. On June 1st, 1954, it read, 4 Dead Sea Scrolls, biblical manuscripts dating back to at least 200 BC, are for sale. This would be an ideal gift to an educational or religious institution by an individual or group. Yigal Yadin, Sukenik's son, who was both a prominent Israeli general and an archaeologist, was lecturing in the United States when the advertisement appeared. Recognizing the critical necessity of reuniting the collection, Yadin quietly used an American banker and philanthropist named Samuel Gottesman as an intermediary to buy the scrolls for $250,000, carefully concealing the involvement of the Israeli government to prevent political complications with the Syrian Metropolitan. The 4 scrolls were flown individually to Israel and reunited with Sukenik's collection in West Jerusalem, ultimately leading to the construction of the Shrine of the Book in 1965 to house them permanently. Meanwhile, the search for more manuscripts in the Judean desert became a race. Professional archaeological teams led by Pierre-Roland Deval of the French École Biblique and Gerald Lancaster Harding of the Jordanian Department of Antiquities competed with Bedouin searchers to locate more caves. Between 1951 and 1956, 10 additional caves were discovered around Qumran. Cave 4, excavated in 1952, yielded the largest portion of the library, approximately 15,000 fragmentary scraps of parchment representing the remains of over 500 distinct manuscripts. Because Qumran sat within the West Bank, which had been annexed by Jordan after the 1948 war, these fragments were deposited in East Jerusalem at the Palestine Archaeological Museum, built during the British Mandate with a donation from John D. Rockefeller Jr., an international team of scholars consisting primarily of Catholic and Protestant academics, was assembled under the Jordanian Department of Antiquities to sort and translate them. In November 1966, King Hussein of Jordan nationalized the museum, taking physical possession of the scrolls. John Marco Allegro, a British member of the editorial team appointed as an honorary advisor to Jordan, wrote urgent letters to King Hussein and Crown Prince Hassan. He criticized the museum's poor preservation practices, reporting that the fragile leather fragments were kept between glass plates under crushing pressure, causing them to darken and delaminate. He also accused the museum's trustees of slowing down publication by selling exclusive publication rights to the highest bidders. 7 months later, in June 1967, the Six-Day War broke out. Israeli forces captured East Jerusalem and occupied the museum, renaming it to the Rockefeller Museum. The Israeli government took control of the museum's holding, claiming them as captured Jordanian state property. While the bulk of the scrolls were transferred to the Israel Museum, Jordan managed to retain several manuscripts, including the famous copper scroll, which had been moved to Amman prior to the war and remains on display at the Jordan Museum today. For nearly 40 years, the small international team of scholars maintained strict monopoly control over the unpublished scroll fragments, refusing to allow outside researchers to photograph or transcribe the material. The academic bottleneck led to widespread frustration. In 1977, Geza Vermes of Oxford labeled this delay the academic scandal par excellence of the 20th century. And Herschel Shanks, editor of Biblical Archaeology Review, launched a major campaign demanding their release. The monopoly was finally broken in 1991, while I was still a senior in high school, through a combination of technological innovation and institutional pressure. Martin Abegg Jr., then a graduate student working under Ben-Zion Wacholder at Hebrew Union College, obtained a copy of the secret word-by-word concordance that the editorial team had compiled on index cards in the 1950s. Abegg realized he could reverse engineer the text using computer software. By feeding the coordinates and context of each word from the concordance into a database, he successfully reconstructed the full Hebrew text of the unpublished Cave 4 scrolls. Shanks immediately published these reconstructed texts through the Biblical Archaeology Society. Shortly thereafter, the Huntington Library in California, which possessed a backup set of master microfilm negatives of the scrolls, announced it would allow unrestricted access to all of its photographs. This effectively shattered the monopoly. Emanuel Tove of the Hebrew University was appointed editor-in-chief of the official International Publication Project, and under his leadership, the remaining volumes of the Discoveries in the Judean Desert series were compiled and published rapidly, opening the entire corpus to global academic study. Now, let's talk about how these scrolls were actually made and what they can tell us about who wrote them. The physical preservation of the scrolls was made possible by the exceptionally dry climate of the Judean Desert, located 400 meters below sea level, where stable humidity and temperature inside the limestone caves protected the organic writing surfaces from decaying. The collection consists of roughly 80% parchment and tanned animal hides and 20% papyrus, with the unique exception of the copper-based alloy used for the copper scroll. Through a detailed technical analysis of handwriting styles, spelling variations, and material characteristics, researcher Emanuel Tove isolated a distinct Qumran scribal practice, QSP, approximately 160 manuscripts comprising almost all of the explicitly sectarian texts and a selection of the biblical texts display a high idiosyncratic system of orthography, morphology, and scribal features. This Baroque or Plane spelling system is characterized by the extensive use of matres lectionis, consonants like vav or yod that act as vowel markers to assist the pronunciation of the Hebrew text. The practice is also defined by elongated morphological endings, such as the pronoun hu, which is spelled with a final aleph, and the second person singular past tense verb ending katalta, spelled with a final he. Tove's analysis concluded that the manuscripts displaying these unique QSP characteristics were likely copied locally within the scriptorium at Khirbet Qumran, where archaeologists excavated inkwells, writing tables, and pottery kilns. Conversely, manuscripts that do not reflect this practice, exhibiting a highly defective or conservative spelling style matching the Masoretic tradition, were likely copied in wider circles throughout ancient Judea and brought to the Qumran settlement from elsewhere, reflecting a broader textual heritage. Roughly 3/4 of the Qumran corpus consists of non-biblical manuscripts. These are divided into sectarian scrolls written by and for the members of the Echad, the community, and non-sectarian apocrypha and pseudepigrapha. While these texts are not found in the Bible formed later in Judaism, it is difficult to say how the original community viewed them. They may have seen these texts as equally authoritative. There was at this time no concept of a single unified canon. These texts offer an unparalleled look at the inner life, theology, and legal interpretations of this Second Temple Jewish sect. So let's break down the major ones. The Community Rule, 1QS. This document outlines a rigid communal structure led by priests requiring a multi-year probationary period for new members. It details strict daily acts of ritual purification, communal meals eaten in silence, and the common use of property. It also contains the Treatise on the Two Spirits, which articulates a dualistic worldview dividing humanity into the sons of light and the sons of darkness. The Damascus document, CD, originally identified by Solomon Schechter in 1897 within the Cheirogenesia, which deserves its own video, and subsequently verified by 8 ancient copies in Qumran Cave 4, this text outlines the history of the sect's origins. It refers to a teacher of righteousness who led the group into the desert to form a new covenant. Because the rules permit women to marry and possess private property, scholars believe that they were composed to determine the lifestyle of Essenes who lived in decentralized camps rather than the isolated community at Qumran. The War Scroll, 1QM, serving as a practical manual for the imminent eschatological war. This document details military strategy, the inscriptions on trumpets and banners, and the prayers to be said during battle. It reflects a belief that a 40-year war between the sons of light and the sons of darkness, or the Kittim, would bring an end to evil and usher in the era of the Messiah. The Habakkuk Commentary, 1QP Habakkuk. Written in a clear, square Herodian script, this 1.48 meter scroll is a relatively complete manuscript discovered in Cave 1. Notably, the four-letter divine name of God, the Tetragrammaton, is written in ancient Paleo-Hebrew characters, contrasting with the rest of the text. Each biblical verse is accompanied by a commentary introduced by the word Pishro, its meaning. It applies Habakkuk's prophecies directly to the community's contemporary struggles against the wicked priest and the liar. The Temple Scroll, 11QT, measuring over 28 feet, that's 8.5 meters in length. This is the longest of the Qumran scrolls, written in the first person as if God himself is speaking. It details the architecture and rituals of an idealized eschatological temple. It emphasizes a higher state of ritual purity for the entire city of Jerusalem, reflecting the group's identity as a temple people who sought to distance themselves from the perceived corruption of the active Jerusalem temple. The Copper Scroll, 3Q15, discovered in Cave 3 in 1952. It is engraved on two plates of copper or bronze, originally forming a single piece approximately 2.4 meters long and 0.3 meters wide. This choice of material, high quality and expensive copper, 99% copper and 1% tin, is highly unusual for ancient texts and suggests a deliberate intent for long-term preservation, indicating the immense importance of its contents. The copper was later cut open in Manchester using advanced technological methods. It contains a list of 64 locations where massive quantities of gold, silver, and sacred vessels were hidden. Unlike the literary Hebrew of the later scrolls, it is written in a dialect resembling Mishnaic Hebrew. Scholars generally agree that the scroll describes real sites where the treasuries of the Jerusalem temple were hidden to prevent them from falling into the Roman hands. However, none of the treasures have been located despite several attempts. The Genesis Apocryphon, 1QAP Genesis, is written in Aramaic. This parabiblical narrative retells and expands upon the stories of the patriarchs. One notable section describes Abraham performing a laying on of hands healing and exorcism on Pharaoh. 4Q Instruction, a sapiential or wisdom work that shares common themes with Proverbs and Ben Sira, indicating a broad tradition of wisdom literature within the community. Before the discovery of the scrolls, textual critics had to reconstruct earlier stages of the Hebrew text by comparing late medieval Masoretic manuscripts with the Greek Septuagint and the Samaritan Pentateuch. The biblical scrolls at Qumran pushed back our manuscript evidence by over 1,000 years. What they revealed was a complex textual landscape defined by textual pluriformity, a period where multiple parallel textual traditions and literary editions of the same biblical books circulated and were regarded as equally authoritative. The idea of a single standardized text was dissolved. Let's look at some of the most critical biblical manuscripts recovered from the caves. The first, of course, is the Great Isaiah Scroll, 1Q Isaiah A. Discovered in Cave 1, this scroll is the crown jewel of the collection, measuring over 24 feet, 7 meters in length. Radiocarbon and paleographic analysis date the scroll to between 150 and 100 BCE. The scroll contains notable scribal corrections and exhibits a highly developed Plane spelling system in its second half, suggesting that a later scribe corrected it to align with Qumran spelling conventions. In a few key places, such as Isaiah 53:11, the text matches the Septuagint over the Masoretic text and has been adopted by modern translations. The Samuel scroll, 4Q Samuel A, this manuscript, copied between 50 and 25 BCE, is critical for understanding the textual history of the historical books. Frank Moore Cross discovered that the text of 4Q Samuel A frequently agrees with the Greek Septuagint and the Hebrew Vorlage used by the historian Josephus rather than the Masoretic text. Sometime before 68 CE, the scroll began to wear thin from heavy study and was repaired on the back with extra leather. It was subsequently eaten by worms and buried under 3 feet of bat dung in Cave 4. Its preservation of a missing narrative gap in 1 Samuel 11 regarding King Nahash's practice of gouging out the right eyes of the Gadites and Reubenites is now widely accepted by modern textual critics as the original superior reading, and who doesn't like a good eye gouging? The Great Psalm Scroll, 11Q Psalms A, discovered in Cave 11 in February 1956. This yellow-brown animal skin scroll is over 4 meters in length. In December 1965, Yigal Yadin acquired a substantial missing portion of the scroll, designated as Fragment E, which contains parts of Psalms 118, 104, 147, and 105 in that order, joining column 1 of the larger manuscript. The scroll contains 49 compositions in a radically different order than the Masoretic text, including 9 apocryphal non-canonical psalms and the prose piece David's Compositions in column 27, which lists the exact number of psalms David wrote based on the 364-day solar calendar. Scholars argue that this scroll represents an authentic alternative canonical psalter that was actively used by the Qumran community, demonstrating that the final book of Psalms remained fluid and open-ended during the 1st century CE. The Jeremiah scroll, 4Q Jeremiah B. This manuscript represents a shorter edition of Jeremiah that lacks several chapters and verses, such as Jeremiah 10, 6-8 and verse 10, present in the Masoretic text. This proves that the shorter Septuagint version of Jeremiah was translated from an authentic, shorter Hebrew parent text, showing that different literary editions of the same book coexisted. The Deuteronomy scroll, 4Q Deuteronomy Q, this scroll preserves the phrase, "and worship him all you gods," in Deuteronomy 32:43, providing the direct Hebrew source for the New Testament quotation in Hebrews 1:6, which had been omitted in the Masoretic text, another subject worthy of its own video. The Paleo-Hebrew Exodus scroll, 4Q Paleo-Exodus M, written in the ancient Paleo-Hebrew script, this manuscript demonstrates the expansionist, harmonizing editorial approach characteristic of the Samaritan Pentateuch, but without the later sectarian geographical overlays such as the references to Mount Gerizim. This textual fluidity means that the modern concept of a closed, uniform Bible is an anachronism when applied to the Second Temple period. The scrolls have allowed modern translators to identify and correct copyist errors that crept into the Hebrew manuscript tradition during the Middle Ages. One example, in Psalm 145, an alphabetic acrostic psalm where each verse begins with a consecutive letter of the Hebrew alphabet, the Nun verse was completely missing in the Masoretic text. The Great Psalm scroll restored the missing verse, reading, "The Lord is faithful in all his words and gracious in all his deeds." I made a video covering that not long ago. Because of the sensational nature of the scrolls, they have frequently been targeted by wild speculations, conspiracy theories, and academic fraud. Responsible scholarship has systematically investigated and debunked these claims, but let's look at a few of them. First, there is the Vatican suppression conspiracy popularized by Michael Bagent and Richard Lee in their 1991 book, The Dead Sea Scrolls Deception. They claimed that the Vatican, operating through Catholic scholars who dominated the early translation team under Pierre de Vaux, deliberately suppressed the scrolls for 40 years to hide information that would undermine Christianity and the divinity of Jesus. This theory has been entirely discredited. The prolonged delay in publication was disgraceful, but it was not caused by theological censorship, but by a highly protective academic monopoly of a small, overwhelmed group of editors who refused to allow outside academics to view the fragments. Once the complete corpus was published following Martin Abeg's computerized reconstructions in 1991, the conspiracy theories collapsed. The scrolls contain absolutely nothing that contradicts Christian dogma. They are Jewish sectarian texts written before the birth of Jesus and do not mention Jesus, his followers, or early Christianity. Second, let's address the controversial figures and sensational claims of John Marco Allegro, the only agnostic scholar on the original translation team. In 1956, Allegro claimed during a series of BBC radio broadcasts that the teacher of righteousness had been crucified by the wicked priest and that his followers took down his body and believed he would rise from the dead. His colleagues on the publication team immediately published a formal letter in the London Times refuting his claims as a complete misreading of the Hebrew texts. In 1970, Allegro published The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross, which effectively ended his academic standing. He argued that early Christianity was merely a cover for a secret drug-induced fertility cult centered on the hallucinogenic mushroom Amanita muscaria. He claimed that Jesus was a mythical projection of this mushroom and that the New Testament was a coded document designed to preserve the secret formula of the cult. Mainstream scholarship, along with Allegro's own publishers and family, dismissed the book as highly speculative, philologically flawed fantasy with no basis in the actual text of the scrolls. Similarly, theories proposed by Robert Eisenman and Barbara Tiering, which attempt to identify the teacher of righteousness as James the Just or John the Baptist, and the wicked priest as Jesus of Nazareth or Paul, are chronologically impossible. Multiple rounds of carbon-14 dating, paleographic analysis, and archaeological data from the Qumran site definitively date the sectarian scrolls containing these figures to the 2nd and 1st centuries BCE, long before the New Testament era. Even the academic disputes could become highly toxic, as seen in the Raphael Golb sock puppetry case. Raphael Golb was the son of Professor Norman Golb, who had mounted a scholarly argument for the Jerusalem origin of the scrolls. When his father's theories failed to gain traction, Raphael engaged in a massive online campaign of pseudonymous harassment and identity theft in 2006 and 2007 to defend the theory. Using various aliases, and most notably Charles Gada, Raphael created numerous blogs and posted on message boards attacking specific scroll scholars by name and accusing them of engaging in a conspiracy. This campaign culminated in a criminal prosecution in New York, where Raphael was convicted of identity theft and harassment. He managed to stay out of jail through an extended series of appeals. Finally, we must address the modern antiquities market forgeries in the early 21st century. A series of previously unknown Dead Sea Scroll fragments began appearing on the international antiquities market, many of which were purchased by wealthy collectors and museums, including the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C. Skepticism among scholars led to a comprehensive scientific investigation funded by the museum in 2019, led by an art fraud investigator, Colette Law. the scientific team subjected 16 fragments to physical and chemical testing, concluding that every single one of them was a deliberate modern forgery. How did they catch them? The forgers had obtained genuine pieces of ancient Roman-era leather, such as the soles of ancient sandals, and written modern Hebrew letters on them using customized carbon inks. Under microscopic examination, investigators observed that the ink pooled into the natural cracks and weathered crevices of the ancient leather, something that would not occur if the writing had been done when the leather was new and smooth. Furthermore, chemical analysis revealed that the skins had been treated with a modern lime depilation technology and coated with a shiny animal hide glue to simulate the gelatinized edges characteristic of authentic scrolls. This systematic exposure has highlighted the necessity of rigorous, multidisciplinary scientific testing to safeguard the integrity of the archaeological record. The Dead Sea Scrolls are just terribly exciting and stir the imagination unlike anything else. Their recovery gives us a window into the world at the dawn of Christianity and Rabbinic Judaism. It allows us to see the Bible as it existed in the late Second Temple period and how one slice of the Jewish community interpreted it. Through modern conservation protocols, advanced microspectral imaging, and rigorous academic analysis, scholars continue to protect these fragile manuscripts, and we continue to learn more from them. They are now referenced frequently in modern lexicons and the critical apparatus of Biblia Hebraica Stuttgartensia, enriching our ability to decipher the ancient text. If you've made it this far, thank you. I had a great time making this video. Please like, subscribe, give it some hype, ring the bell, join the Discord, get a membership, whatever else YouTube has cooking. I'm always looking for new ideas for videos, and there are 1,000 side quests I could have included in this video but did not. Let me know what you'd like to hear more about in the comments below. Until next time, take care and shalom.